And Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a landfill controversy that lingered for years and in the process shook up the U.S. Attorney's Office came to a quiet settlement this week. We'll see what was learned about who was right and who was wrong. For LaToya Cantrell, questions about her use of city credit cards seems to be lingering as well. We'll examine both of these stories as well as dueling candidates in the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's race, the latest on pending federal appointments, and examining the roles of Louisiana's two senators. Our Future Watch segment looks at this season's Sugar Bowl, which could be especially important in terms of both revenue and the journey toward a national championship. Starting for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Stephanie Grace, reporter, the New Orleans Advocate. And we go over to Steph first. And in the saga of mayor-elect and credit cards, that just is continuing. And there was some action in court today in criminal district court.
It started as a campaign issue. It started as an opposition research file attack, and now it's in court. It's interesting. A lot of people have been waiting to see what LaToya Cantrell would do first, who she would hire as a CAO, as head of the Sewage and Water Board. The first big hire was her lawyer, Billy Gibbons, who's a very prominent. So that you know, it tells you she's taking it seriously. There is debate over how serious the possible allegations, we're not even there yet, are, but when the Attorney General is coming after you, it's serious. And so she is lawyered up with a guy named Billy Gibbons, who's represented Darren Sharper and Fred Hebe and all kinds of people.
So he's a
big
powerhouse
gun.
attorney, yeah.
And they were in court this morning. They were in court Friday morning because Attorney General Jeff Landry basically asked all of the judges in Orleans Parish Criminal Court to recuse themselves. And there was a hearing before Judge Lori White. A couple of reasons for this. One is that LaToya Cantrell's father-in-law is a magistrate judge, so he works in that courthouse with these judges. Another is that the mayor oversees the budget and the city partially funds the court. So these are the arguments they made. They did not get a friendly hearing, let's put it that way. Judge White rejected the motion to recuse all of the judges. She also rejected a motion to recuse herself. And but there's she set another hearing for early January, which will basically be whether to quash the subpoenas that have already been issued to get financial records of LaToya Cantrell.
And that was issued by Jeff Landry, the state attorney general.
That was requested by Jeff Landry and signed off by Judge Burris, I believe, right?
Who recused herself.
And who then recused herself.
Signing off on the subpoenas.
Yes. And these are subpoenas that apparently did not go to LaToya Cantrell. They went to financial institutions. She says she hasn't seen them. But, you know, one of the things that, in some documents that Judge White unsealed, her lawyer argued that she had not, that these were intrusive. They're going beyond the city council records. They're going to her personal finances. And also that this is a political prosecution, which is something that she said back during the, when DA Leon Canizero got involved back during the campaign. He was a supporter of Desiree Charbonnet, whose campaign came up with this in the first place. He kicked it up to Jeff Landry. So basically, it's harassment by a political opponent and too intrusive.
She used the phrase intrusive and harassing witch hunt in the motion Gibbons filed. And
something that's kind of worth noting, Jeff Landry has been a very political attorney general. He's picked fights with Democrats, John Bel Edwards, also Mitch Landrieu over policing. And this is really kind of setting up a relationship with the next mayor of New Orleans. So I think we're going to see more of the same.
He's generally picked a lot of fights with New Orleans, I would say.
Yes, on sanctuary cities.
And been critical of the city in other ways, for being a crime capital and so forth.
Yeah. Right. Didn't he send investigators here or something?
A task force without the police's permission basically.
This whole situation certainly raises issues of judgment. But there's nothing illegal about judgment, even if it's bad sometimes. Is there any scenario that you see where there could be heading to some kind of illegality?
If there could be, I mean, certainly there could be. Yeah, I mean, first of all, we don't know what the investigation will find out.
Right.
If they discover the same things that are already essentially known, which are that LaToya Cantrell spent her credit card on some things that were questionable and perhaps
paid
personal,
some money back.
and then paid them back. I think the question there, that's something they could potentially file charges about. I'm not sure if it would be a very successful prosecution, but that would be up to a jury to decide. But I mean, they could file a charge calling this theft, even though the money was paid back, for instance, or malfeasance in office. And there have been similar cases. We'll actually have a story coming out on Sunday that looks at how this case fits into the sort of context of other similar kinds of cases. But I mean, I haven't seen a successful prosecution of someone who misused a credit card and then paid the money back essentially of their own volition. I have not seen one of those in Louisiana.
And something else that's worth remembering, there's kind of a normal course of how these things go. The legislative auditor is also looking into this, and they're looking into the entire council, because once we got records from other council members, it turns out they had done many of the same things, and the policies were very loose on reporting.
They were maybe not quite as extravagant or questionable, but a lot of
Right.
the same kinds of practices.
But Jeff Landry seems to be only going for LaToya Cantrell. So again, I was thinking of Eddie Price's there was a big legislative audit, and then there was a prosecution. Mike Edmondson, the former superintendent of state police, we published a story based on a draft legislative audit that's very damning. It would not be surprising if prosecutors then got involved, but for the two things to be happening at the same time is unusual.
And then once again, Landry is looking for, at any rate, what he's requesting is around her personal financial records, beyond city council credit card, right?
Right, that's what we
think.
believe. We
Yes.
haven't seen the subpoenas, but
Okay.
that's, and LaToya Cantrell says she hasn't
She
either.
hasn't seen them either,
She said
right.
she didn't have a problem with him requesting records from her city council
Public
credit card
spending.
or from her campaign account, but not from her personal account. But in an investigation like this, I would expect that they would want to look to see that when she reimbursed the money, that it actually came from her account and that sort of thing. But I don't know if it may be going beyond that and looking at all of her personal expenses
Right,
seems
or
fairly broad.
if when she's traveling on the city dole, is she putting anything on her own credit card, or was
Right.
the whole thing on the city credit card, that sort of thing.
And
Right.
that was one of the issues that came up.
But they're
during the
calling it a
campaign.
fishing expedition to just look at all of her personal spending.
Right, and that's what she objects
Yes.
to. Yeah. Okay. All right. So January 3rd is the next hearing on
Yes.
that. Okie doke. Thanks a lot, Steph. Over to Gordon right now. We had a settlement in a case that has been, oh gosh, going through so many little,
years.
alleys and narrow ways. So what happened with the settlement, and will we ever know?
Right, this was the case of Waste Management versus River Birch, which is sort of two big trash companies, Waste Management, a national company, and River Birch, a local landfill company owned by Fred Hebe and Jim Ward. And this was a civil racketeering case that mirrored an earlier federal criminal probe that had fallen apart. But basically, Waste Management was accusing River Birch of a pattern of bribing essentially local politicians through campaign contributions, mostly funneled through fake companies and so forth, and that through these bribes, or what they characterize these as bribes, that they were able to get favorable contracts. The main centerpieces of their case were they got a very favorable contract in Jefferson Parish that was eventually ripped up, but that cost Waste Management a lot. It involved they closed down the Jefferson Parish landfill, which had been run by Waste Management, so it cost the company a lot of money. The second case, the second sort of main focus of this lawsuit was that a landfill opened after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans East called the Chef Menteur landfill, operated by Waste Management, which was going to be very lucrative for them because of all the debris generated by the storm. That was closed by Mayor Ray Nagin, and Waste Management felt this was because River Birch had put a lot of money into Ray Nagin's campaign account through these straw companies. So anyway, it was going to be a fairly interesting trial, but it was settled at the 11th hour, as these things often are. We don't really know anything about the terms of the settlement. I imagine it was not a gigantic settlement because the judge over this, Kurt Engelhardt, had actually narrowed the scope of the what was at stake at trial, and he'd taken the Chef Menteur closing out of it, which was really the much more significant financial piece of this. And that was something where Waste Management claimed they had lost tens of millions of dollars the other part of it was had cost them approximately $1 million in legal fees. So,
But in that settlement, because Waste Management appealed that ruling not to allow the East landfill in there,
Right.
And the settlement allows that appeal to proceed.
they've preserved their right to reopen that. So if they win the appeal and basically a higher court rules that Englehart, the judge, was wrong to narrow the case, they can then relitigate the case on that, and they potentially could win money. But I mean, I don't know what the chances of that happening are.
So-
Gordon, I think what this case will be best remembered for is the collateral damage
Right.
Absolutely.
along the way, especially the old overthrow of a very popular U.S. Attorney's office and a very popular U.S. Attorney, and it just changed that system totally.
Absolutely. I mean, just spectacular wreckage from this. And just to recap really briefly, Fred Hebe, who was one of the landfill's owners, hired these lawyers, happens to be the same lawyer now representing LaToya Cantrell, who unmasked several federal prosecutors as people who were commenting anonymously on stories at NOLA.com about federal cases, including this case into Fred Hebe. That had a huge cascade of effects, among which was Jim Letton having to leave as U.S. Attorney. Several of his top people had to leave, and then it caused the feds to pull the plug on this entire criminal probe, which had been something they'd been working on for years.
And a couple of other pieces of it. Judge Englehart was of course instrumental in that too. He would have been the
Yes.
trial judge here, and also Fred Hebe. If you'll remember, way back when President Bush was nominated, he was the first choice to be U.S. Attorney, and he didn't pass the background check, so he never got the job. Jim Letton eventually got the job,
And then
the rest
to
is
leave, yeah.
a very convoluted history.
And another echo to the president, another one of Fred Hebe's lawyers was in line to be U.S. Attorney recently, and then he didn't make the cut, apparently.
And after all that, we still don't know exactly what the settlement
what
is.
happened at the end.
One thing I'd like to add on the end of this, just real briefly, is there is a Board of Ethics investigation into these donations that had been stayed while this litigation was going on, and that can now be reopened into the straw donations, which could still prove to be pretty interesting. And there was a concession made in this trial during a deposition by River Birch's owners that essentially they were using these companies to hide the source of this money.
Okay, we'll
So-
try to digest all of that as we move on over now to Errol. And we do know there are two people right now in the race for sheriff of Jefferson Parish.
Absolutely, and this first happened, when Garland Romanet, which is another name kind of linked to all this, okay?
That's right.
When he resigned his announcing position, or his talk show host position, WWL, and to everyone's surprise, the station came up with Newell Norman, and I think people thought it was a good choice because he's very popular. He's certainly well-grounded in civics and various activities, but immediately the speculation was, well, who's going to be the new sheriff? And I think originally people suggested it's going to be a big race. And it doesn't seem to be heading that way. It seems like it's going to be probably a two-person race. If there's another person, it probably won't necessarily be a serious candidate. But right off the bat, Newell Norman selected his interim to be Joe Lapinto, who's worked with the sheriff's office before, who's been in the state legislature, and so he is the acting sheriff now. And then John Fortunato, who for a long time worked in the sheriff's office as mostly in public relations, but there was a time earlier in his career when he was an on-the-beat cop. Was even in the shooting incident where he got shot in the neck at one point, has gotten into a race. So it looks like it's going to be Lapinto against Fortunato. And so I think there hasn't been much polling except one poll that UNO did, and this was in October. And not too much has happened that I don't think would change people's opinion since then. Now, it was a robo poll, and it only called landlines, and so it has all those problems dealt with. But still, if you get enough responses in a different direction or in the same direction, it makes you at least think. Okay, and in that poll, at the time, again, this was out in October, Fortunato had 44% in answer to the question, who would you vote for? Lapinto had 19%, but still a whopping 30% said that they had no idea at that point. But it's, for Fortunato, at least, it was a good position to start from. If you watched the Saints game last night, there were at least two spots that I saw with Lapinto, not necessarily campaign spots. It was more of like civic service spots.
Yeah, PSAs almost.
Talking about police safety.
Right.
And he has another spot that he does talking about jobs open on the sheriff's office. So to talk about the advantage of incumbency.
Yeah,
And so he's
Right,
really able to play
definitely.
that. And to do that by at that time. It's got to be one of the most valuable time buys you can do, right in the Saints game.
I mean,
Right.
you said it was a small race. It's few candidates, but a
Yeah.
big race with a lot at stake. And I mean, there are signs everywhere already.
I mean, I think one of the
Already, yes.
reasons you don't see more candidates is
Is that
because
these
it's sort of a high bar of entry, and,
Yeah.
and you've got two kind of heavyweights already.
And some real
in there.
factional
Well, certainly if anybody was
politics
watching the
and-
Saints
yeah.
game last time and was thinking about being a candidate,
Yeah.
they may say, I don't
Exactly.
know.
Yes.
I think I see what's going on here, So
Okay, election in March, right? Is that
the
right?
election will be in
Yes.
March. Qualifying is January 3rd through 5th.
Okay.
Election is March 23rd.
All right, it'll be an interesting one to see. Don, so also will be interesting is the Super Bowl. Not
Sugar
Super
Bowl.
Sugar Bowl. Well, that will be interesting.
Yes, always
But
interesting.
We know the Sugar Bowl, we know will be here, and it's going to be a good revenue generator for us.
A huge revenue generator, according to all the experts at the Tourism Marketing Corporation and the Sugar Bowl board itself. It's a matchup between Alabama and Clemson. Those two teams for the last 2 years have played each other for the national championship. This time it's for the college playoff system. It's only our second college playoff game since the NCAA switched to this system. The last time it was Alabama and Ohio State, and generated about everything tied to the Sugar Bowl, all the activities for the whole year, brought in an estimated $250 million. This time they say it could be as much as $300 million, partially because you've got two teams that travel very, very well and are regional enough to travel well. Also because of the luck of the calendar, and January 1st this year is on a Monday. So people will likely come to town on Friday or Saturday and stay all the way until Tuesday. People who have off work for holidays will be off on the 2nd, so it's an easy time to travel. It's also the second of a 3-year contract for the city with the Dick Clark Productions New Year's Rockin' Eve. We are the Central Time Zone city, and I'm told the bands that are going to be down on Decatur Street on the stage for that have not been announced yet, but they're supposed to be much bigger and better than last year's bands, so we'll have that national audience. We're also in the midst of the Tricentennial Celebration campaign, and national ads started running on September 11th on television programs. There's also national print ads running in major magazines like the New York Times Magazine, Travel and Leisure, ESPN Magazine. So all in all these things are set to draw tons of people to the city who will come and go to the game or come and just party surrounding the game. Tickets on a first-time grab are no longer available. They're on the second tier on Ticketmaster. They say, big warning to fans, if you're buying on the secondary market, to buy from a reputable source. And if a deal seems too good to be true, don't take it. But it should be a big event with a New Year's Eve parade kind of kicking things off on New Year's Eve down Decatur Street at 2:30 that afternoon.
And out of this game
So-
will come the team that will go to play in the
Go
national
play in the
championship.
national championship. And bowl games, Errol and I were talking bowl games. There have been some studies that show that the fan attendance might be down. It depends on the bowl game. When it's a playoff game for the team that's going to the national championship, they say attendance is way up.
And I guess
So,
viewership would be way up, too.
500 media requests so far, roughly. There were actually more 3 years ago when it was the first round of playoff games, because at that time it was a sports and news story for how the whole system was changing. CNN and World News Tonight, and those folks were requesting credentials. They're not coming this
How
time.
many people need to be covering a game to find out who won?
That's a great question. But they need their highlights of their people.
Yeah.
That's right,
So
indeed they do.
It should be a big event with hotel rooms at high 90% occupancy
It's got to be a
rates.
big weekend in the
Yes.
city, that's for sure. Okay, thanks a lot, Don. Gordon, you mentioned it a little bit a while ago, and let's explore it a little bit more, and that is those federal appointments that are still out there, haven't been filled.
Yeah, it's been a little slow. President Trump, you may remember, fired all the U.S. attorneys who had been holdovers from the Obama administration, which is a common practice, but he did that back in March. Oftentimes when presidents do this, they've got a slate of people ready to put in those jobs, and it's been a pretty slow process. So real quickly, where we are with this is we're expecting Peter Strasser, a local attorney, to be a longtime former federal prosecutor, to be nominated as the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District. That hasn't officially happened yet, but we're told by reliable people that that's in the works. Brandon Freeman, who is a top aide to Jeff Landry, he's already been nominated for the Middle District U.S. Attorney job. There hasn't been anyone named to the Western District, which is sort of in Shreveport and Lafayette. And then in terms of judgeships, we've got Kyle Duncan has been nominated to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. He's a Baton Rouge lawyer and sort of conservative warrior, and he's expected to make the grade. There's a little bit of a he had a little bit of a glitch in his hearing process, but I think Stephanie's going to talk about that in a little bit. And Kurt Engelhardt, who's currently on the Eastern District bench, he's been nominated to the Fifth Circuit as well, and we don't expect that to be any kind of a glitch.
Do those go through Senate confirmation?
Those do go through Senate confirmation, and neither Duncan has had his hearing. Engelhardt has not, I believe, but the panel has indicated that they're probably going to vote for Duncan. Another local lawyer, Barry Ashe, has been nominated for a position on the Eastern District bench. I don't think he's come up for a hearing yet, and we're expecting still that Wendy Vitter, the former senator's wife, is going to be nominated, but that hasn't actually occurred yet. That would be a presidential nomination as well. And then there's another seat that will open up because of Kurt Engelhardt moving from the lower court to the appeals court, assuming that happens, and we don't have a name yet for that position.
So there have been a lot of vacancies that just have remained over the course, really, of this year. Do we foresee that, indeed, they're going to start being filled?
They seem to start. They've been moving on it a little more recently, and there's been, and I guess it's a slow process. I don't know exactly what the hang-ups have been, whether it's been, disagreements among some of the senators about who to nominate, or just that there's so many different things going on that it's taken a long time. But
I mean, the strange thing is that the Trump administration, also the Senate Republicans, seem very eager to get judges into the system, young judges who get lifetime appointments, and especially when they're looking at the possibility of losing the Senate next year.
Right, it's a huge priority.
Yeah.
But
it hasn't. So other judgeships have moved pretty quickly. These have not.
Well, and so you mentioned, what the senators' roles in getting all of these positions filled, and what their nominations are, their recommendations, their lack thereof. Right. So what sort of roles have our senators been playing?
Well, it's been interesting. Senator Kennedy is on the Judiciary Committee, so they get the first crack. Basically, the nominees go before the Judiciary Committee. If they are recommended, then they go to the full Senate. Just about all of them have been party line votes so far. John Kennedy actually was the first Republican to vote against a Trump nominee, actually in the full Senate, not in the Judiciary Committee. And that was a pretty big deal because it was an appeals court judge for the D.C. Circuit, which is kind of all the appeals courts, that's kind of considered the first among equals because it tends to feed the Supreme Court, as people on the Supreme Court often have served on that court, and it gets basically the cases that come out of Washington.
White House, yeah.
So big cases. So John Kennedy surprised some people voting against this guy. He got confirmed anyway, so they didn't need his vote. So, would he have done this if they needed his vote? That's very unclear. But he made a little bit of a statement, and that was that he wasn't he's very conservative. It was interesting, I got a press release from Vanita Gupta, who was the head of civil rights in the Justice Department under Obama, very liberal, basically commending him for voting against this nominee that was so bad from her point of view on civil rights and gay rights and women's rights and all of those things. That's not why he did it. He's with them on all of those things. He did it because this is someone who actually works in the Trump White House and has been involved in formulating policies that could come before the court. And he said that was a conflict of interest. And even beyond that, he basically kind of publicly trashed the Office White House Counsel, a guy named Don McGahn, who's in charge of all of this, who apparently he's really been butting heads with on a number of occasions and said he's not serving the president well. Brought up a few other nominees. There's a judge out of Alabama, a nominee out of Alabama, who's been very controversial. He's never tried a case in court. It turns out his wife works in the White House. There's a blog post that it sounds like he wrote that may have been defending the KKK. So Kennedy actually voted for him in committee, but says he will vote against him. And this is something that it's been controversial nationally, so he could be withdrawn.
So he wasn't going to support Kyle Duncan, but he did.
And then the other one was Kyle Duncan, which was interesting. Now, Kyle Duncan, you mentioned he's from Baton Rouge. He doesn't live in Baton Rouge, which was one of Kennedy's objections, that he's a Washington lawyer, even though he's from Baton Rouge. He went to LSU. He's worked for the state. And he's someone who's really kind of a hero in the national social conservative legal movement. He was the lawyer in the Hobby Lobby case, which was about whether employers should have to provide birth control if they have a religious objection. He's done, kind of gay rights cases, all of those social issues. And it was unusual for Kennedy to hold him up. He was one of the Louisiana appointments to that court. And it was interesting because they had a hearing on him anyway. Kennedy made a big deal about the fact that he was undecided. And meanwhile, Bill Cassidy, the other senator, shows up at his side and basically recommends him. So that's a little unusual because usually the senator who's on the Judiciary Committee would have primacy, and you kind of wonder what's going on between the two of them. In the end, he did also complain that Don McGahn, this White House counsel, got on the phone and told him this would be the nominee. Didn't ask, told. And I think Kennedy's point of view is this is something that often the home state senators get a lot of say in. And there are all these Louisiana lawyers who have the same credentials, the same positions on social issues, calling me saying, hey, what about me? Am I chopped liver? Why are you supporting, looking at this guy out of Washington? After this kind of very contentious hearing, Kennedy did come out and say, I will support him. So it looks like he'll go ahead. But, he's kind of flexing his muscles really for the first time as a senator. And
he's also uttering those Kennedy quips in the national media.
It's interesting to watch the national media kind of catch on to him and see, the weed killer quips. And, two things. One is he's quotable. The other thing is he talks to them. So when they're looking for what's going on behind the scenes, they kind of go to him and he'll say something funny and they'll quote it. And sometimes they'll take it as a sign of what's really going on and he'll have to walk it back because it was really just a lie. That happened once during the tax debate. So.
And they like his Louisiana folksy way.
And the accent, apparently.
Thanks a lot, Steph.
Yes.
It's time now to look ahead. Errol.
Well, you may be familiar with a thing called Cajun Caviar, which has been around a few years ago. For a few years, it's made out of the shoe peak, which is a fish out of the Atchafalaya Basin from the roe of it, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's been fairly successful. Well, the Cajun Caviar people announced today that they have a new Cajun Caviar in addition to this one, and this is made from the paddlefish, which is an ancient fish historically, but it's they say it's a bit milder, a little bit more of a woodsy type taste, and they'll be putting it on the market soon.
And the pricing is going to be sort of.
Oh, the pricing, it'll be less expensive than the other. It'll be a more inexpensive caviar, which is, of course, what we all want.
That's absolutely what we all want. Gordon.
I'm going to be sunny here and predict better weather, better refereeing, and 3-0 for the rest of the year.
I'm with you on that. Don.
Speaking of inexpensive, there's lots of free fun to be had with the Sugar Bowl December 30th and 31st. Right along Decatur Street, there's the Fan Fest with pep rallies for both schools. And then December 31st is that New Year's Eve Sugar Bowl parade that starts at 2:30 on Elysian Fields all the way down Decatur.
Oh, very good. Steph?
Well, Congress is not shutting down today. They've given themselves another 2 weeks. They've also given themselves another 2 weeks to reauthorize the flood insurance program. Very important around here.
Very.
And I'm going to tell you, I predict it will go longer than that. I predict it will be more extended beyond that because they're not close to it.
It's a very important issue, that's for sure.
And it's very complicated, and there's no consensus.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.